So hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Hello from wherever you are. Welcome to the University of Cape Town's Pesticide Discussion Forum. Today, we will be looking at triggers for the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals implementation, and specifically looking at pesticide labeling, highly hazardous pesticides identification, and regional approaches. And you are all most welcome. We have a strong panel today that will take us through this discussion. I invite you, if you haven't already, to introduce yourself in the chat room with your name, organization, and country. And if you want to rename yourself, to put your organization or country next to your name so that we all can see where you're from. We do have a WhatsApp group. If you are having technical issues, you can go to the WhatsApp group. I believe it will be on the screen shortly. Again, welcome, and we are fortunate to have three presenters, and to remind you that this is really not so much a webinar as it is a discussion. So we have three presenters today who will be leading us in the background to three questions. We will then move into the chat function, so make sure you're able to find the chat room, and we will discuss the questions for about 20 minutes. And there will be polls on the screen from time to time in Mentimeter, and we'll indicate to you how to respond to those. And just to remember that this is really not a partisan discussion, but that we respect everyone's opinion. We may not agree, but we respect everyone's opinion, because through dialogue is how we're going to actually problem solve together, as well as do peer-to-peer learning. As I mentioned, this is a University of Cape Town pesticide discussion forum, and we operate through kind support from Sweden, which is administered through the Swedish chemical agencies. Again, you're all welcome. Please introduce yourself in the chat room with your name, organization, and country. And let's go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we will have three presenters. We will start with Dr. Lilian Törnqvist from the Swedish Chemicals Agencies, Chemi, where she's been working since 1991 as a senior advisor in the international unit for the past 12 years. Her main activities and responsibilities have been giving advice regarding chemicals, especially pesticides, risk management, and establishment of institutional capacity and enforcement. And she also serves as a FAO-WHO panel member representing FAO for the joint meeting on pesticide management. Welcome, Lily. Could I just ask that people mute themselves, please? Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Beatrice Grenier, who works with the FAO on various pesticide management issues. She's involved in normative activities related to the FAO-WHO International Code of Conduct on Pesticides Management, as well as field projects in West Africa. She's been involved in pesticides and chemicals at the international level for many years, through working at the OECD and participating in the IOMC, and has been involved in many aspects of the pesticide life cycle, as well as registration, residues, etc. And she's also coordinates the activities and development and trainings of the FAO registration toolkit. And I hope all of you know how to find the link to the registration toolkit. She has a master's degree in chemistry and environmental sciences, as well as an MBA. Welcome, Beatrice. Next, we have Oliver Wooten, who is a specialist with UNITAR, particularly in their chemicals and waste management program. He has over 10 years experience working in sustainable development, health and environment in Malawi and within the UN. He's also led UNITAR's portfolio on the GHS since 2015, coordinating the GHS e-learning course, which I hope many of you are aware of, managing and developing national capacity building programs, researching the status of the GHS implementation around the world, and serves as a UNITAR's focal point to the global partnership to implement the GHS, which is partnering with many organizations, including ILO and OECD. Welcome, Oliver, and thanks to all three of you for taking the time to take us through this important discussion today. I will then hand over to Lillian, and if we can have the next slide. Please do continue to introduce yourselves in the chat room. Lillian, you're welcome to turn on your video if you like.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. I think it is, and good afternoon, and good afternoon to the whole group. I think it is Beatrice who will start the discussion, and I will come after her, and finally Oliver, I think. Thank you.
Thanks. My apologies for getting the order wrong. So then, Beatrice?
Yes.
I'll hand over to you.
Hi, Andrea. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Hi. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. So, yes, today we are going to see issues around the GHS and pesticide labeling. So just to remind everyone about the GHS, which was first published almost 20 years ago. We are now at the 8th edition, and I understand the 9th edition is upcoming. And this is referred often as the Purple Book, I guess because I've never actually seen it, the cover is purple. So it's a voluntary international system, and it addresses the classification of chemicals by types of hazards, whether it's physical, health, or environmental hazards, and propose harmonized hazard communication elements, including labels and safety data sheet. So it's really to ensure that the information on hazard from chemical is available, so that eventually we enhance the protection of human health and the environment when we handle, we transport, or we use the chemicals. So when it was established, the UN Economic and Social Council, the ECOSOC, invited first the governments basically to implement the GHS as soon as possible, and at that time was no later than 2008, and also invited the UN programs or agencies to promote the implementation of the GHS. And we will hear later in question 3 from Oliver, who is from UNITAR, who is one of the leading agencies to support countries to implement the GHS. So UNITAR is one of those agencies. So GHS applies to chemicals in general, with some exclusion. So basically, and pesticides are covered by the GHS. So the classification and labeling of the pesticides should follow the provisions of the GHS. And if you want to know about the implementation of the GHS, there's this pretty new links, which is regularly updated, and you'll find there the list of countries that have implemented the GHS and for which sector. I mean, not all countries have implemented fully the GHS. That's indicated in this document for which sector the GHS is implemented. Can I have the next slide, please? So now about really question 1. Just to remind you, I hope most of you are familiar with the International Code of Conduct on Pesticide Management, published by FAO and WHO. And also it's a voluntary framework to guide governments policymakers and regulators, but also the private sector, civil society, and other stakeholders on best practicing for managing pesticide throughout the life cycle. And for all pesticide uses, whether it's for agriculture or public health. And the most recent version of the code is from 2014, and many provisions, articles, we say, relate to labeling or container and to the GHS, and list the responsibilities and standard of conduct of both governments and the pesticide industry. So next slide, please. Yes, so really in the code of conduct, you will see, for example, this article 7.4, that says that governments and industry should ensure that all pesticides made available to the general public are packaged and labeled in a manner that is consistent with FAO, WHO, or other relevant guidelines on packaging and labeling, and with appropriate, so consistent with those guidelines and with appropriate national or regional regulations. And pesticide industries, more specifically, and traders, there is addressed in various other parts of the code of conduct to ensure proper labeling. So by proper labeling, I mean it's about the quality, the presentation, the claims that can be found on the label, the directions of use, that the fact that they need to be updated regularly, that they need to be clear and concise in the language of the country where it's sold. Says about the identification, what's inside, and of course it should comply with national labeling requirements. It's what Article 10.2.3 says. Labels should comply with national labeling requirements, or in the absence of more detailed national standards, with GHS, with the FAO WHO guidance on pesticide labeling and other relevant international labeling requirements. So I've mentioned this FAO WHO guidelines. So next slide, please. So those guidelines, well, there's one guidelines on a good labeling practice for pesticides, which is part of a series of technical guidelines, because basically you have the code of conduct, and along is supported to really give more technical aspect by a series of more than 40 guidelines on the various topics covered in the code itself. So this guideline specifically on labeling was I think one of the first guidelines to be written in 1985. It was amended several times. The main revision was in 95. It was now it's revised. It has been revised recently, and it's going to be published in the coming months. We are working on it. And the aim of the guidelines in general is to assist the registrars in reviewing the design and the content of the labels. And as I further to what it says in the code, it provides guidance on what label is, what it is for, and how it should like, so the different elements, the layout, etc. And the recent revision that we are going to publish soon, it really further stresses the importance of using GHS as the classification system. Before, it was that we were giving two options between GHS and the WHO classification of pesticide biohazards, but now we are really stressing that all countries should follow GHS for pesticide labeling. And it also includes a further reference to GHS, because we've included as part of the guideline, there's a color banding system, basically, that shows the hazard, kind of the hazard classification, and with the color of red, yellow, blue, and it used to be green, but now we put gray. That's one change. And this color banding used to reflect only acute toxicity, and now we've put in place that it should reflect both acute and severe chronic toxicity, using also the GHS. So that's a new a change in this new revision. But I'm not going to focus on that, but just to mention that really the GHS is highlighted in this new version. Next slide. Is it the question already? Or... So yes, that's the question. The question is basically how the Code of Conduct from 2014 and the associated guidelines, I would say mainly the labeling ones, but there are also other guidelines, can be triggers for national and regional GHS implementation for pesticides. So over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Beatrice, and thank you for that succinct and important introduction. So we are going to move into the chat now to discuss, and also feel free to ask questions. If you maybe Beatrice's introduction stimulated a question, you're welcome to also put that in the chat. And really what we're trying to focus on is, you know, how we can promote the implementation of the GHS in low and middle income countries. And so this question is really seeing, well, can these documents be triggers, and how could they be triggers? So we will move into the chat. There will be poll questions on the screen at some stage. And Beatrice, you are welcome to respond to questions verbally if you'd like to. I have turned my video on, but I'm not sure if you can see me.
Yes.
You can. Okay,
yes.
Good. See you in the chat room.
And by that, we also mean that contrary to the expectation from 2003, which had this target of having the GHS fully implemented in all countries by 2008, we are still not at that stage. And you can see that in that page I mentioned, where you see the different countries that implemented the GHS. So we are still not there yet, and there's still many countries that need to implement GHS for pesticides. So how can the Code of Conduct can help or can be a driver for that, especially in low and middle income countries? Or we could give the, as everyone attending today actually opened the Code of Conduct, I would hope so. I mean, not every day, but at least once in your life. But we can maybe give the address of where to find the Code of Conduct. It's in English and in the other 5 UN languages.
So while you're thinking about the first question, that we have posted the question in the chat as well, we invite you to go to Mentimeter. So you can either go to menti.com and put the code in that's on the screen, or you can click on the link that's being provided to you in the chat room now. And then we're asking you, well, how can 2 voluntary instruments such as the code and the GHS contribute to producing legally binding GHS pesticide legislation in countries. So how can these kinds of documents or instruments that are voluntary actually be triggers for legally binding legislation? Thank you.
Andrea, do we see the response coming where they are published on the screen?
Yes, you will.
Yes, okay. That's a challenging question. So I'm reading the comments live. I cannot read them all at the same time, but I see that Hashka from ILO, hello Hashka, you've also mentioned other legally binding instruments such as ILO conventions. And I think it's the key point is to create a comprehensive legislative framework referring to this different instrument, whether they are legally binding or voluntary. I think that's a very, very good point. I also see an interesting comments about information sharing across all sectors and stakeholders is a good way to build synergies. I think that's it's an interesting comment because indeed GHS applies to all chemicals, but from different sectors. So it can indeed also help building synergies among or cooperation among different authorities within a country or within a region. We have not, maybe some of you have already touched that point, but that the importance of ideally implementing the GHS at the regional level, and regional cooperation is also promoted in the Code of Conduct. Yeah, they both, I mean, two voluntary instruments. They do provide a framework for the legal framework. I don't know how to say that, but that's interesting. And I see it's coming. The voluntary instrument can be a source of reference for issues that may not be specifically covered by the legally binding legislation. Absolutely true. There may be more aspect into the voluntary instruments. That's a very active discussion. Thank you. I think it's coming back again in the Mentimeter.
Yes, it's been a very lively discussion. We have one more poll question, and so I see 24 people have responded, but we're going to go to this one. We will post the link again in the chat room for you to go to Menti, but you can always go to menti.com yourself and put the code in that you can see on the screen. And also you can always scroll up in the chat room and you will find the link as well.
Okay, so that's the second poll. So the second poll is what would be needed in a revised code of conduct for promoting GHS implementation. And by that we mean that I haven't mentioned it. I said the code of conduct, the current version is from 2014, but I think it is the fourth, if I'm not wrong, it's the fourth, already the fourth version of the code. So depends on the issues, how fast they are advancing, but we will be starting a revision in the near future. So that could be an opportunity to include some more aspect dealing with GHS in the revised code of conduct. So the question is, and it was, I think it's even more specific. I mean, if you can even suggest some text, I mean, if you have prepared for today, I mean, you may have some text already available, but otherwise feel free to send that to us by email or after the discussion. Because we will take into consideration all good advice on how GHS implementation can be promoted. Yeah, we've seen one of the comments mentioned that now that the labeling guidelines incorporates both chronic and toxic both acute, and toxic hazard, health hazard, that can really motivate national regional authorities to embrace GHS. Absolutely true. That may be a trigger to go to GHS.
Just to let you know that we've posted the 5-minute warning. So we've got 5 minutes to wrap up on this discussion, and then we'll move on to question 2. So Beatrice, feel free if you also want to make any kind of summary points at this time, you're welcome to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at the suggestions of what would be needed in a revised code of conduct. One suggestion or comment is about knowing more about the impact of the current code of conduct, and that's what we are trying to do with another guidelines on monitoring the code and monitoring the effectiveness of the code. That's one thing, and also the barriers to GHS implementation. That's true that they are good to know and analyze before we can recommend further aspect in the code to promote GHS implementation. Yeah, someone has mentioned the WHO classification. As I've mentioned, I mean, we used to recommend it. I think initially only the WHO classification, then in the next revision, both classification, WHO 1 and also the GHS. And then in this new version, now we're really focusing on the GHS, also because it does include acute and chronic hazards. So maybe it's time to move on, but just a quick summary. Maybe I'll start with this last point because it's, as I said, it's good to have your feedback and suggestions for revising the code of conduct, whether we can improve the content and then stress further the GHS and how to do that. So we will analyze your answer to that. Thank you very much. And then about the questions itself, from what I've read, and sorry I haven't read all of the messages, but I will do. It's really we can see that the code itself and the supporting guidelines could be trigger, but together with other instruments, whether they are legally binding like conventions or non-legally binding. So we see that it's the code itself is a driver, and it's really what we want. at FAO and WHO. And we will continue working on that and making sure. We were discussing with UNITA as well how we can really promote GHS implementation in the pesticide sector. So who should we target? And I mean, FAO is really linked to the Ministry of Agriculture. So maybe to foster implementation in the agricultural sector, we should do more training with people in the agricultural sector, but not only, because pesticides, it's a cross-sectoral issue, but that's something we also want to work towards. Thank you. I think I can pass the floor to Lilian this time. And to you, Andrea, first.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. You've taken us through a very important discussion, very lively discussion, and thank you for that and bringing in your expertise. So Lilian, we will hand over to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to everybody. It's so nice to see this discussion ongoing. First of all, I would like just to add to what I could read in your comments, one aspect also for me working at an agency, and that is the importance that you get those rules referring to GHS into legislation, because you need that when it comes to enforcement. It hasn't been mentioned so much yet. And you can then request from, in this case, if we talk about pesticides, from that industry to label their products accordingly. And I would like to add already here also awareness a little bit. We will come back to that in other discussions, but also we need strategies, because the next step is that farmers and workers should understand what's on the label, the symbols and so. But anyhow, how to get GHS into legislation in a country. One thought was to refer and link it to the work on highly hazardous pesticides. And you have seen in the background it has been defined in the code of conduct that Beatrice just described to us. So I think, I mean, it's also now including long-term effects like cancer, causing cancer, toxicity to reproduction and so. And to know this, you need data, and you need to evaluate the data and classify the substances according to the criteria that has been agreed in GHS. So I think we can go immediately to the next slide, please. You see here in bold, there are especially the 3 criteria, number 2, 3, and 4, referring directly to GHS. Just to remind you. And some of you have already started to work on identifying highly hazardous pesticides, and among them looking into these 3 criteria of the 8. In total there are 8, but these 3 are referring to GHS. And to be able to then assess whether a substance fulfills these 3 criteria, need data. And you need also classification. The best case is when industry is classifying their products, and you as a registrar, you control that classification. But during the work in many countries until now, I know that you can also go and look into databases where active substances already have been classified by groups or experts, different kinds. And that way you can then identify HHPs fulfilling especially these 3 criteria. So that's the first step. You can do this and it's ongoing. But the next step is looking at the alternatives and the properties of these. And again, you need data to see whether they are better or they also cause problems. So therefore, linking back to data requirements is very important. And we have seen, and we will discuss later on during this session, data requirements in different regions. And if you look at, for example, into East Africa community, those countries have agreed on data requirements, and they include GHS classification of the products, for example. So our thinking is that could it be so that by this way, requiring data that you can do for pesticides that you can't always do for industrial chemicals, but for pesticide you can require data. And you look at the data, you also look into agreed databases, and you can classify whether they fulfill HHP criteria. You can trigger implementation of GHS in the country. That is one thinking. The next step could be if we go to, for example, now we talk here about agriculture and health ministries or departments. Another step could be to go into labor. And I saw a very interesting comment here from ILO that there is a convention even that should be binding. So by that step, going by Ministry of Labor or Department of Labor, you can require GHS implementation in the country. And then you cover both workers in agriculture and the other workers. So this is the thinking behind the question coming up here. So I propose we ask the question here and we can discuss together. How can identifying HHPs and GHS pesticide labeling of pesticides drive GHS implementation covering all other chemicals? So let's go ahead and let me see your thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. A very important twist on trying to promote the implementation of GHS. I think this is a nice trigger. So we will discuss this in the chat. And Lillian, you are welcome to stay on and continue responding. I know it's a bit easier. And there will be a poll question shortly. Thank you.
I do my best. I have a question actually to Hashka. Very interesting response from you. Could we perhaps have a list of those conventions that have very clear links and synergies with the GHS? Could be helpful, I think, when discussing in countries and support the implementation of GHS. Oh, thank you. There was a question about any example from a country where they have implemented GHS with the support of identifying HHPs. I have the example a first step, I would say, in Tanzania. In the report coming out from that work on identifying HHPs, it was concluded, okay, we must now implement GHS in our legislation. I'm not sure where they are currently, and I'm not sure whether somebody from Tanzania is online and can give update. But that was the reaction from that stakeholder conference. And I hope they are working on it.
Just a reminder, if you want to respond to the poll question, there is a link in the screen in the chat, and you can go to Menti and respond to it. And I think, Lillian, you've got a response from Tanzania.
Okay, I don't see it. So I should...
Oh, no, maybe Nosiko didn't respond specifically. Sorry. But,
it's not so easy to... I see there are very interesting replies, but I have a little bit of a problem to follow. I will try. I see that now a reply from Nosiko, yes. And Zimbabwe. It seems a good development also in Zimbabwe. Could I ask back again, is GHS already implemented in the regulation or in the law, or is it in guidance documents? So what is the legal situation, if you could describe? Because as I think it was Chris from Zambia, his comment was that if one department or one ministry is taking lead, the others can then refer to many, for example, the criteria in the first legislation could simplify procedures a lot, I think, depending on the legal situation in the country. Yes, and I think more you talk about regional legislation or legal approach. Yeah, we will discuss very soon that way of simplify the implementation, I think. It's one idea that we think might help. Nice, cherry picking, yeah. Now I understand better the implementation in Zimbabwe. It's a new expression for me. Yeah, worker safety, yeah. I believe it could be strong, and that's the way GHS was implemented in South Africa. It was Department of Labor which was driving, and the other departments are now following, as I understand. Yes, about South Africa, yes, GHS has recently been implemented in by Department of Labor as a first step. This is about, we had lots of discussion about jurisdiction in countries. They can only implement for labor, and then the other departments are planning to follow on this. I think Agri is close to this. I think my colleague Cecilia might be online, and she is working very close to colleagues in South Africa. She might help also. And if the legislation is there, we can for sure circulate a copy of it. That is a good point on the right to information. Yeah, it's a very good point for workers. Well, there are other colleagues from South Africa that can answer the question about the implementation, I see. That's really good. Yeah, there is also a comment on safety data sheets, SDS, and workplaces. Yeah, and that is under GHS as well. It's one of the steps when implementing it, and it's very important, of course. The GHS system could also help in general reducing risks if we start that discussion, because you can choose better alternatives just by looking at the labels. Can more or less already see also strategies here. Next steps, as somebody is saying here, of course, the workers or the farmers must understand what's on the labels when they are labeled according to GHS. And so such a strategy is very important in the country, of course. It should go parallel with the work on legislation and so on. And also who is responsible for doing different steps. And I think that is good advice from UNITAR. I think there is a new guidance document on strategies that could be helpful too. Yes, the inclusion of the right to information, this one we should highlight really. It's good, thank you for that one. Thank you, Tatum. We have now 5 minutes for concluding on these questions. But all of these 3 questions are linked to each other, as you can see also. Yeah, we didn't mention so much transport, but of course it's really linked, those two. There's a separate rules referring to transport. So if I try to summarize a little bit, it seems like many of you think that by starting implementing GHS on pesticides area or chemicals, and also the situation on identifying HHPs, it could be a helpful tool to continue then with the rest of the work on chemicals. What is sometimes a bit difficult for other chemicals is how you require the data. But that's another story to be discussed. And also ministries or departments of labor seems to have the possibility to become a very strong driver in countries for the implementations.
So I suggest we perhaps start moving on to the next question, unless you want to make any other comments, Lillian. Again, thank you very much. This has been very stimulating and generated a lot of input.
No, I think I can stop here, and I would like again to thank you for all these good comments and ideas that we will look closer into after this discussion. So thank you to all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lillian, for leading this question. And just a reminder to everyone that we will harvest all your comments and put them in a digest, which will be translated into French and circulated after this meeting, so that you can continue to use the document. And perhaps it will stimulate some projects and work or research, who knows. So we now move on to our third question. And Oliver, I hand over to you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone else. This has been a fantastic discussion. Some things I've already read that have sort of stirred more thoughts and got me thinking. And Andrea, you're quite right. You know, the idea now is to think a little bit about what this can start up. Might there be projects? Might there be activities that we can start working with? I just wanted to comment a few of the Mentimeter answers and the discussion points. I thought were very interesting. One, the Ministry of Labour and Ministry of Agriculture should work and push together for GHS implementation. I think that's you know, a fantastic point, and something that the Global Partnership to implement the GHS is certainly thinking about and focusing on that multi-sector part and who and which stakeholders we can bring in and work further with. And then if this HHP's identification can be done at regional level, then GHS implementation will be easy to adopt even for other chemicals which are not pesticides. And so that's, you know, a great reinforcement of that second section there, talking about HHPs and GHS, and this regional part that we're going to talk about now. And then also someone commented that the regional approach is the way to go if GHS is to be implementable, as more countries will have adopted one single policy towards a certain chemical or pesticides. And that would not happen if it's all done at national level. So that's another great sort of reinforcer of the regional approach. So just quickly, you know, UNITAR is certainly not as big as FAO and some of the other agencies that we mentioned today. So UNITAR is a training arm of the UN. We focus on capacity building, training, and support for activities and research. And I sort of consider that very much that a lot of the UN big agencies, they develop agreements, conventions, and policies, but there are multiple avenues for helping countries and stakeholders to implement those, and UNITAR very much focuses on that. We work closely with UNECE that hosts a secretariat to the subcommittee of experts on the GHS. And as Andrea mentioned earlier, we're co-lead of the Global Partnership to implement the GHS with the ILO and the OECD and a range of coalition partners. So that's very important that we work with several others. On GHS, we've done several national activities for training, regional activities, developing implementation strategies, putting in place guidance. So I referenced legislation guidance coming up, national implementation strategies, and lessons learned document as well. These will be forthcoming in the next month or two. We've been working more on legislation, this idea of bringing in GHS legislation and getting the number of countries up that Beatrice mentioned. And we have an e-learning course which is available in English and Spanish and is run twice a year. Next slide, please. Thank you. I referenced briefly there lessons learned documents. So we've been trying to understand a lot more what's gone well, what's not worked so well for countries that have tried to implement the GHS or are looking to do so. Document those and really use those as a basis for upcoming work or future work. We had a section on regional and international links we thought was important for this discussion forum. So on that, we found that there's a need to improve alignment between national, regional, and international approaches, and I think that's been mentioned today. International and regional cooperation projects can play a vital role in delivering and enhancing knowledge. It's important to consider if GHS can be integrated into existing work plans and programs of regional organizations. In addition to that, it might be important or valuable to develop a regional network of experts. It would be valuable to cooperate or benchmark with neighboring countries to pool resources, share information about implementation status and plans, exchange technical competencies, learn best practices, discuss challenges and solutions, and aim to prevent or reduce any unnecessary differences in approaches and timelines. It's also been mentioned on this call, but another one was to consider how GHS implementation may link to national implementation of other international agreements. Of course, you've got the BRS and Minamata conventions, you've got ILO conventions and other conventions that Hauschka referenced, the international health regulations and WHO policies, and of course, we're talking about very much talking about the code of conduct today as well, and the SDGs, of course, multiple avenues there. Thank you. Linked to that is also trading issues and considerations. So one of the lessons was that there are several technical challenges or issues that exist that can result in a lack of harmonization, barriers to trade and added costs, and these can cause confusion for workers and consumers, such as using different GHS versions, building blocks, timeframes, confidential business information, safety data sheet compliance. I noticed recently that Mercosur has committed to increasing harmonization and starting with implementing the same version of the GHS. I thought it'd be interesting here just to reference some of the agreements that I'm aware of or policies in the regions, noting that some of them cover multiple sectors while others just focus on pesticides. And one of particular interest is the EAC guidelines on data requirements that it might be coming up in the near future. Thank you. So thanks again for the lively discussion so far. Hopefully this one will be interesting as well. So we would like to consider what support is needed to implement regional GHS strategies for pesticides applicable to your country or the country or countries that you work in. So thank you.
Thanks, Oliver, for that and for that introduction and some important advice and tips about regional opportunities. We will have a couple of poll questions again, so please look out for those. And in the meantime, we'll see you in the chat room. And Oliver, of course, if you want to comment during the discussion, you're more than welcome to. If you want to respond to the poll question about useful documents, or if you want to indicate which documents are missing, make sure you do say missing in your post so that we're clear of that. You can click on the Mentimeter link in the chat room and it will take you straight to Menti, or you can go to menti.com and put in the code on the screen. Thank you.
I would just like to come back on one of the comments there from Nosiku about trade agreements, and that is as part of the partnership we discussed this. You know, it can be, GHS is important in several different agendas and agreements, and one of them is certainly trade. Kemi have done a study on this with an academic, and I colleagues on the call can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's available and published. And that talks about the presence of GHS mentioned in trade agreements. It's very few at this point, but it is certainly an opportunity for the future. In terms of the partnership, we're trying to work more closely with WTO. So we can make that link a bit stronger, and see how we can work with the trade related stakeholders out there, and not just environment or agriculture or labor or health. So it's a good point and something we're trying to understand a bit more.
So we have our last poll for the third question. What funding mechanisms are available that could be accessed for the GHS and pesticides? And really you need to think about national, regional and international funding mechanisms. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. And just to add, from very much from the UNITAR point of view, we've worked with countries before under the Quick Start program. That, of course, doesn't exist anymore. There are always, there's always a thought that you can do special program projects through UNEP, but that isn't always possible. Global Environment Facility projects on the GHS also aren't possible. And these are, very environment focused. So the question is, we're talking about all these links to safe working practices, to agriculture, to trade, these multiple elements of sustainable development. So are there any other funding mechanisms that we think we can access in a slightly different fashion to promote this kind of work, and not just some of the traditional chemicals management funding mechanisms? just responding to or taking further some of these comments in the Menti forum, talking of budget allocation from governments, things like that. I know that Kemi did some good guidance on sustainable financing of institutions, and UNEP also turned that into UNEP guidance. UNITAR will be doing some video-based e-learning for that as well. So I recommend everyone to look out for that in the coming months. And I think we can work with Tatum to share the links to those documents as well.
Yes, we will definitely do that and make sure the documents are included in the digest as well as circulated. And we are slowly coming to an end, or actually rapidly coming to an end. Oliver, did you want to make any other statements before we do the closing?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity today. Yeah, I agree with those comments really, that about finding the entry points, and that's very much what we're trying to do here. As Beatrice mentioned, we're having more discussions with FAO, plenty of discussions with ILO and other stakeholders in the partnership to consider all these different angles of the GHS and implementation. Some of the obstacles that people have talked about: training needs, capacity building, understanding the system, raising the profile, coordinating across the regions. These are broad chemicals issues, not just for the pesticides and agriculture sector. So these all resonate with us as things we're trying to work on. And I think starting with these discussions is great, and see where we can take it. So thanks to you and everyone on the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for those concluding thoughts. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Lillian, Beatrice, and Oliver for taking us through an important aspect of GHS implementation. I mean, I think we've been trying to discuss a fair amount about GHS implementation and really bringing in the pesticide sector and the agricultural sector into it. So this was really important. And I think this concept of the triggers, looking at, well, what other aspects can you use? Can you use documents like the code that already exist? Can you use HHP identification? Can you use regional bodies and regional collaboration? So I think all of these were excellent points, and we have stimulated quite a lot for us to think about. I was going to say digest, but we will have a digest. So again, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for the participants for your very active contribution, your important comments and points that you've made and documents that you've alerted us to. This is really important for us to have these types of discussions. And it's very nice to see that everyone's really getting into doing it virtually through the chat room, which is a little bit different from just a webinar. So thank you very much. Thank you for those of you who are answering the evaluation poll. There's one on Zoom. And also, if you have any particular topics you would like us to further discuss in future pesticide discussion forums, you can put those in Mentimeter. We do appreciate. And also you can continue putting comments. So our next discussion, Tatum, is in 2 weeks' time. If you can just give us the date. It is on the 29th of July. We are still securing the topic and the presenter. We are hoping it will be on drones and drone application, but we're not quite sure yet. So just keep an eye out and look out for our announcements. Make sure you've joined our pesticide discussion forum. The link will be in the box. So if you haven't joined before, please make sure you join. You can also join the WhatsApp group. The link will be in the chat, and then you will get future notifications of discussions coming up, as well as the digest from this discussion. So thanks again to everyone, to the presenters and to the participants, and I wish you a good rest of your day and stay safe.